Hello, everybody, and welcome to Box Seat Banter. I'm your host, Billy Ballas, a baseball coach. I've been coaching baseball for over a decade now. Season ticket holder, huge baseball fan, love talking about baseball. And today I'm talking about the Kansas City Royals. I'm broadcasting from the Crown Seats in Kauffman Stadium. And joining me today is a multi-talented individual, Jeremy Greco. He's a writer, gamer, developer, and a baseball nerd. And that last part is the part where it's coming in handy today. The baseball nerd. You can check out his website, fromthehawkside.wordpress.com. He's got a YouTube channel with some gaming stuff. You can check that out. And he also writes for the Royals Review on Twitter. You can see his takes at it's HOKIUS. Jeremy, welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's looking forward to talk about the Royals with you today. And the Royals, they were founded as an expansion team in 1969 in the American League, originally an AL West team. It's funny thinking about Kansas City as a West team. But yeah, they were in the AL West from 69 to 93 until we saw the wild card era when we saw the expansion of the divisions. And they've been in the AL Central since 94. They originally played in a Municipal Stadium from their creation, 1969 to 72. And Municipal Stadium has, a lot of history to it. There's a lot of deep baseball roots in Kansas City, especially the Negro Leagues. So you look back, there was, I think the Monarchs played in Municipal Stadium. And then the A's played there, I think, a little bit before they on their stop. Yeah, their stop from Philadelphia to Oakland. Then Kauffman Stadium opened up in 73, and they've been there since. Although it was not, was it originally called Kauffman Stadium? Are you
No,
aware?
it was originally just Royal Stadium, and then they
Mhm.
renamed it after Kauffman died.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful stadium. One of the older stadiums. We've seen a lot of those kind of retro stadiums come back into vogue right now. And, in the past 20, 25 years, a lot of new stadiums, but Kauffman Stadium, now it's being built in 73, is one of the older ballparks around, isn't it?
Yeah, it's weird to me to think of it as being one of the oldest ballparks because it always seemed so new to me when I first started watching baseball.
Yeah. What's it like attending games at Kauffman?
Oh gosh, it's a really great experience. I don't feel like there's a bad seat in the house. I've sat all over the place from right behind the dugout, or excuse me, right behind home plate to in the upper deck, out in the outfield, just all over the place. And there's just a great view everywhere. It was a great experience every time I've been.
Yeah, and that was, it was built in an era when, we had a lot of those cookie cutter multi-use facilities, in Cincinnati, in St. Louis, in some of these, what we have, like in Pittsburgh, all these towns with football teams, or they have these artificial turf cookie cutter stadiums that have that, the football and baseball both played. But Kauffman Stadium built in that same era, and it's completely different from those parks, and it's still around, unlike those other places. Because nowadays, how many multi-use facilities are there? There's not many, are there?
I'm not sure if there are, I think Oakland, when the Raiders and
That's
the
right.
the
Yeah,
Athletics were playing, both there was the last one. And
yeah,
now the Coliseum is just baseball only since they moved to Las Vegas.
that's right. Yeah. So when they built Kauffman Stadium back when it was built, like you mentioned, it was Royal Stadium. When they built that originally, they did a good job of doing it and building it to last, and it is still there, still beautiful, and no need for any replacement, which is nice. I like seeing the old stadiums. And yeah, it's odd that a stadium built in 1973, we're talking about, is one of the older stadiums, but it is. When we look back at the past quarter century, the Royals they've won the AL Central just one time in 2015, and they've got one wild card win, which was in 2014. And they've made good use of those playoff appearances, because both times they won, went into the postseason. They won the pennant there in 2014 and 2015, so back-to-back pennants, and they won that 2015 World Series. That was their second overall World Series after having previously won in '85. How stressful was that wild card game in 2014?
Yeah, it was pretty stressful. I remember there was a lot of chatter among fans about, or at least fans that I knew online, that, oh, this is a wild card game, because this was very shortly after the wild card game was even introduced.
Right.
And they're like, oh, it's not the real playoffs, and it wasn't even played in October. The game was scheduled for September 30th. And so people were like, this isn't even real postseason baseball. And but all I wanted out of that, I assumed kind of that the Royals were going to lose that game, because the Athletics had been so good that year and had just kind of fallen off out of nowhere to end the year to end up in the wild card game. And all I wanted was for the Royals to just play a good game. If the Royals played a close game, I would have been satisfied with what happened. And obviously that was one of the craziest postseason games we've seen in recent history, with all the stolen bases and everything, and the huge comeback that the Royals made. And then they had to come back again in I think it was the 13th inning when they finally won it, 12th or 13th inning. So it was wild. And I have to admit, I actually did quit on that game. I gave up when they were losing by some ridiculous amount in the 6th or 7th inning, and I just couldn't do it anymore. And I only came back for the 9th inning when I realized they had a shot to make it a good game again.
Yeah, and then I think they swept the Angels then after that, right? Mike Trout's only postseason appearance to date.
They swept the Angels with 9th inning or extra inning home runs, and then they swept the Orioles, and then they went to the World Series.
Yeah, and the World Series, much like that wild card game, they started the postseason on a crazy game, and they ended the postseason on a crazy game. And unfortunately, they did not end it on the high note that they began it. But you don't often see a team lose Game 7 of the World Series and then come back the following year and get there again. So it's impressive to get back after that defeat and kind of ending on that down note, especially after that long postseason. Your off season is shortened a little bit, so credit to them to be able to win the Central the following year, get back, and then they took care of business against the Mets in 2015 to win their second world title. Must have been a nice way to end the season, especially after the heartbreak the year before.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, because I remember feeling like I wasn't ever as concerned in 2015 as I had been in 2014. I think I just kind of felt like the team was really good at that point, and they were going to keep getting to the playoffs for a couple more years at least. And so I was like, if they don't win the World Series this year, at least they're going to the playoffs regularly, and that's good enough for me. And fortunately, they did end up winning that World Series on some crazy stuff, and because they haven't been back since.
Yeah, and we'll kind of get to that in a little bit, and then just touching back on some of the past of the Royals, some of their players. They've retired a few numbers. Number 10 for Dick Howser, number 20 for Frank White, and then, of course, number 5 for the Hall of Famer George Brett. And then number 42 also retired across baseball for Jackie Robinson. George Brett, total Kansas City Royal legend, right?
Yeah. They've actually had more good players than you'd think, considering their history of never making it to the playoffs. But George Brett just stands heads and shoulders above everybody else.
Yeah, would you say he's Kansas City royalty? Is that too on the nose?
I think it might be on the nose, but it describes his relationship to Kansas City pretty accurately.
Yeah,
I don't
no,
think
go
I don't think
ahead.
he goes anywhere to any bar or any restaurant and pays for his own meal or anything.
Yeah, it's earlier on this series talking about the Padres. We talked about Tony Gwynn and kind of what he means to the Padre organization. It feels like George Brett's got the same meaning to the Royals organization.
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty accurate.
Yeah, so that's what we've got on some of the history of the Royals, and then we'll get to some other personnel coming up shortly. Jeremy, as we've gotten into the AL Central here last week, we talked about the Tigers, and the trivia question on the Tigers was that they've actually been to the World Series twice in the past quarter century, but unfortunately they were swept out of the World Series in 2012, and in 06 they lost in 5 games. So they've just won one World Series game in those 2 appearances. And the question was, which pitcher recorded the win in their only World Series game victory in this era?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's a tough one for a Royals fan to pull. I don't know if you
I feel
watched
like if
all.
I was a Tigers fan, I'd have that name just like melted into my brain,
Yeah,
but I have no idea.
it's a pretty well known pitcher, and I don't remember him pitching for the Tigers a lot. But actually, I got to give credit to Rogelio Castillo, my guest for the Tigers last week. He got the correct answer. It was Kenny Rogers.
Ah,
So back in 06 when I think they lost to the Cards. Um,
that sounds right.
Kenny Rogers was the winning pitcher in Game 2 of the 06 World Series. So that brings us to this week's question about the Royals. So as we just mentioned, the Royals, they won that World Series in 2015. So who was the ALCS MVP and the World Series MVP on their championship run there in 2015? So Jeremy,
2015.
yeah, do you have a guess for that for the
Yeah. I think the ALCS MVP was Alcides Escobar, the shortstop,
Mhm.
and then the World Series MVP was Salvador Perez, the catcher.
Okay. And as is normally the case, I will not reveal if that is correct or not. Listeners, if you want to chime in, if you want to agree, if you have a different answer, you can chime into the conversation on Twitter and or Instagram. It's at Box Seat Banter on both of those platforms. So let's get into the owners. As we mentioned in the first segment, how they play at Kauffman Stadium. It was originally Royal Stadium, but then changed the name to Kauffman after the owner. Um, and Ewing Kauffman was the owner until he passed away. And his estate owned the franchise from 93 to 2000. And then David Glass owned the team for a couple decades from 2000 and 2019. And the current owner is John Sherman. And they've got a minority owner that a lot of people out there may know who's got a pretty big weekend right now. Patrick Mahomes is a minority owner of the franchise. So they've been in the ownership box since 2020, so just last year. Jeremy, what are your thoughts on these owners? And I mean, how big of a deal is Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City right now?
Well, let me just say about Patrick Mahomes real quick that the guy is obviously insane at football. He's maybe the best quarterback out there right now, maybe the best all time. Though I'm sure there are plenty of people who would argue that last one. Um, and apparently there are people who would argue even the first one, trying to say that even Josh Allen is better than Patrick Mahomes as of a couple weeks ago. But he's such a breath of fresh air in Kansas City for the football fans, because they hadn't drafted a quarterback in the first round for so very long, and then they finally do, and they end up with somebody like Patrick Mahomes, who just changes how everything works. And he's been a genuinely good person, it seems. Just whenever he's interviewed or when he does things, he seems like a good person. And then he shows his commitment to Kansas City, which Kansas City is I don't know how other towns necessarily feel, but Kansas City is very us against the world in a lot of ways. So to see him sign the big contract to stay with the Chiefs for basically most, if not all, of his career, and then to buy a stake in the Kansas City Royals and just kind of plant himself in Kansas City, feels really good to a lot of people, seems really good to a lot of people. But talking about the ownership kind of situation that the Royals have had, the estate situation was really a frustrating period, because it was really cool, because at the same time Kaufman had set up this situation where the Royals would not leave Kansas City just because he died, which was awesome, especially for a lot of fans who had just seen the A's leave
That's
town.
right. Yeah.
So to say, oh yeah, this guy has made it so that the team is staying, and he set it up so that when the team was sold to another owner, that owner had to agree not to move the team. But it was also frustrating because, being a trust situation or an estate situation, they didn't really have authority or funds to really put money into the roster. So the team was pretty bad and pretty cheap for that entire period. And then David Glass bought the team, and things improved a bit. Obviously we saw the World Series in 2014 and 2015 under his watch, but it did also kind of feel like he was really cheap sometimes. I still even remember the Royals were adding extra prospects, not guys who were big deals, but guys who could have been something, and in trades in the 2015 season to get Johnny Cueto and to get Ben Zobrist. They were adding prospects so that they wouldn't have to pay a couple $1 million for their salaries, and that just seemed like a kind of a cheap move. John Sherman has only owned the team, like you said, since 2019, so it's hard to judge his ownership period too harshly or to be that excited. But I am a little bit excited just to see in this offseason, where it feels like a lot of guys, especially early on in the offseason, nobody seemed to be getting signed, and the Royals were signing some guys who weren't, it wasn't just, oh, we'll sign this guy and hope he does something. Like, they're getting a Carlos Santana who's been good. And he might be getting a little bit old, but he probably still has a couple of years left in him, you'd think. So it's just been nice to see them actually signing some guys who have some history of success, some history of recent success.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned how they were cheap and including prospects in deals, and finished with Carlos Santana, because he was, when he was traded, when the Dodgers traded for Casey Blake, this was back when Frank McCourt was the owner, and Frank McCourt was getting pretty cheap. They, instead of including some more money in the deal, the Dodgers sent Carlos Santana to even it out.
Yeah, see, the guys the Royals sent didn't turn into anybody worth anything, but that's the risk you take when you're willing to send prospects to save a little bit of money.
Yeah, and so now the guys who are in charge of sending those prospects, the GMs, they've had Herc Robinson was the GM for about from the 90s, from 1990 to 2000. And then Allard Baird was the GM from 2000 to 06. And Dayton Moore has been at the helm since 07. I'll let you give your opinions on the GMs before I kind of chime in. Go ahead.
So Herc Robinson, I don't know a ton about who he was as a GM. I wasn't really paying close attention to kind of the roster manipulations during the 90s. I just watched kind of the on-field product and saw what happened, and I didn't really become a fan until the late 90s anyway. But I know he was basically in an impossible position, like I was talking about with the estate and the trust. There was just no money anywhere to spend on free agents or any of that stuff. So he just kind of was in an impossible situation, and I think he knew it. And then Allard Baird took over when David Glass came in, and by all accounts, excuse me, Allard Baird he's a really, really good scout. He's a really good evaluator of talent, but he wasn't necessarily who the Royals needed as a GM. And David Glass was especially cheap in his early years, and so kind of when Dayton Moore came in 07, he said, listen, you know, if I'm going to be your GM, you're going to have to spend some money, and kind of got him to open up the pocketbook a little bit. And you know, we saw obviously that eventually that led to a couple World Series appearances. I have not been super impressed with Dayton Moore's ability to find talent in trades, especially. But I can't deny that he did a really good job with his free agency signings in 2013, 2014, 2015 to make sure the team had the talent and the depth to go to the playoffs those years.
Yeah, I feel like Dayton Moore, everything that he says publicly, like about kind of baseball and the business aspect of it, is like everything that a fan kind of wants to hear. You know, he talks about how, you know, he doesn't want to tank, right? And he wants to kind of go for it. And it's just kind of a breath of fresh air when you compare that to what some other organizations are doing. And even that, you know, being in an organization that doesn't have the funds that other teams may have. And it's, I think that's kind of refreshing to hear. He seems like a great guy and an easy guy to root for. I mean, you would have, I guess, more knowledge of that, being a little closer to that and more aware of all the day-to-day things. But does that sound accurate?
Yeah, for the most part, he seems like a really good person. He's very outspoken about his Christian beliefs, which can push some people away a little bit. But he seems to actually follow through on those kinds of things, so that draws other people in. He does do some weird things, like he invited a questionable group in to talk about porn addiction during one spring training. That was just kind of like, why is this your focus, and why are you bringing in this group that uses this questionable science when there are other issues that you really could be tackling or doing stuff with. So, you know, he's got his kind of ups and downs a little bit, but for the most part, I think people think of him as a good person. Just when they're frustrated with him, they're frustrated with him not as a person, but as a, like, and honestly, Royals Review is kind of thought of as an analytically oriented kind of area, and so a lot of people wish he would tank. So they're like, oh, that's the only way the Royals are ever going to be good again is if they tank for a little bit. And so there's some conflict in that area too. It's pretty interesting sometimes.
Yeah. Now let's talk about some of the guys who've been at the helm on the field. I've got a little tidbit about the manager, and see if you can identify the manager from that fact. Some of these are pretty digging pretty deep, so they might be tough pulls for you.
Right.
But we'll start with somebody who's the descendant of an American pioneer and frontiersman who is one of the first folk heroes of the U.S. And I can't really give that guy's name because it would give away this manager's name. But do you know who that is?
That I want to say it's Bob Boone.
Yeah, Bob Boone, a descendant of Daniel Boone. And Bob Boone also, you know, one of the members of a 3-generation MLB family. So Bob Boone was manager from 95 to 97. And this next manager, speaking of those 3-generation families, this next guy was an amateur baseball player. He's playing in junior college at San Diego Mesa Junior College, and he was scouted by Ray Boone. And Ray Boone, of course, the father of Bob Boone. And this guy would eventually replace Bob Boone as manager of the Royals. Do you know who that is?
Let's see. Is that Tony Muser?
Yeah, Tony Muser. So he was there for about 5 years, 97 to 92. Kind of found it funny that Ray Boone scouted this guy who then would eventually.
That's an interesting connection. Yeah.
Yeah. Now they had a manager after Muser who managed the Dominican Republic to the 2013 World Baseball Classic title. And they were the first, and they remain the only World Baseball Classic team to go undefeated. They were 8-0 that year, the Dominican Republic was, when they won the title. Do you know who that manager is?
Is that Tony Pena?
Tony Pena, yeah, you're 3 for 3 so far. Their next manager has also, so he's, I mean, like most managers were players at some point. This guy was a player. Obviously, he was a manager. He's also been in the front office. He served as the assistant GM with the White Sox. And he's been, this is a tough one because he's managed elsewhere, and I've used some of the other better trivia facts on him on previous episodes. So I was digging deep on this one here. So he was an assistant GM with the White Sox. Any guess who that is?
Is that one Buddy Bell?
Buddy Bell, yeah. So another member of the 3 generation families, and both Buddy Bell and Bob Boone are 2-generation managers, since both of their sons have managed in the big leagues as well. And
they got that BB thing going.
That's right. Yeah. I got to say, people with the BB, it makes a great baseball name, if I do say so myself. Their next manager, now sticking with the family theme, he's the father-in-law to Brett Phillips, the Brett Phillips who had that walk-off hit in Game 4 of the 2020 World Series.
Oh, I think you're gonna wait. Is that? It's not Ned Yost, is it?
No, not Yost, not yet.
I can't figure this one out. I'm stumped.
Trey Hillman.
Oh, Trey Hillman.
Yeah, so
how did I forget Trey Hillman?
He was there for a few years, 2008 to 2010. And now this manager, the next guy, appeared in a Verizon commercial. And he did so because he had his cell phone on him after a fall out of a tree stand. He fell 20 feet from a tree stand, broke his pelvis, but luckily he had his cell phone on him. He was able to call for help. And it saved, and ended up saving his life. And because of that, he was in a Verizon commercial.
That's Ned Yost.
That's Ned Yost, yeah. And he's got his. What was he doing up in that tree stand? Because he's got like a huge property there, right?
Yeah, he actually he lives here in the same state I do, Georgia. And he likes to hunt deer on his property, and I think he was up there. He was prepping to hunt some deer, or he was hunting some deer. And the really interesting thing about that situation to me as a Royals fan was that we of course heard that he'd fallen out of the tree stand, broke his hip, was, in the hospital for a while, but we all thought like, oh, it was no big deal. And then, as the story began to kind of trickle out, it was like, oh my gosh, he almost died.
Yeah, but thankfully he's still around. But I think he retired, correct?
Yeah, he retired the year before last, after 2018.
Yeah, and so now their current manager as a player has the MLB record for consecutive games caught without an error at 252 consecutive games.
And that's Mike Matheny.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, Ned Yost was there 2 decades. 1 decade. Still a pretty decent amount of time for a manager, the longest stretch at any of these guys. Any thoughts on him or any of these other guys as the manager?
Tony Pena was an interesting case because he took over, I think, in 2003. Or that was maybe his first full season. And that was the Royals' first winning record in a decade, I think. And it had been a long time since they'd even had a winning record. And and he was credited with bringing kind of life and spirit to the clubhouse. And then the next year, the team kind of tanked again. 2003 was kind of a fluke, and he tried to just kind of keep pulling shenanigans to keep the team involved. And there was the kind of infamous incident in Kansas City where he got in a shower with his clothes on to try and spark something out of the team, and it didn't work, and he ended up just kind of quitting, and just kind of jumping ship and not really telling anyone what was going on.
Yeah, maybe that might work in A ball in Bull Durham, right? But I don't know if it works in the big leagues.
Tony Muser is interesting because I'm pretty sure he found out he was fired from news reports, not from his boss. And he was kind of famous around Kansas City for quoting that he wanted ball players who would pound tequila, not eat milk and cookies, which was kind of taken as a shot at first baseman Mike Sweeney because of his prominent Christian faith.
So Muser,
Ned Yost
sounds like Muser. Oh, sorry. Sounds like Muser could have been managing those Boston Red Sox of recent years.
Yeah, I might have gotten along a little bit better there. And Ned Yost is the last one I have any kind of really strong opinion about. He's kind of a divisive figure in Kansas City for the first part of his term here. The team still wasn't any good, and he'd been fired from Milwaukee in the middle of a playoff run, so there were a lot of questions like, do we really want this guy running our team? So there was this on Twitter especially, there would be the hashtag Yosted whenever he would do some kind of questionable managerial decision that caused the team to lose or helped the team to lose. And in the end, I think he's the manager that kind of taught me or made me believe that in-game tactical decisions, especially in the American League, but really I think in the National League too, are just not that important to how the team wins. Like if your bullpen is full of bad pitchers, doesn't matter which one you go to, you're going to be in trouble. If your bullpen is full of good pitchers, doesn't matter which one you go to, you're probably going to be okay. And so really the on-field talent matters more than the manager's ability to make tactical decisions, which leads me to believe that a manager's true role is really to just kind of be a leader of people and to just kind of keep the team together, keep the team focused. And in that sense, I think Ned Yost was actually pretty good about that. And so by the time he left, I was a pretty big Ned Yost fan, but I know a lot of people still are of the opinion that he just kind of lucked into 2014 and 2015, and the Royals maybe could have gone further if they'd had a different manager.
Yeah. I think with the recent analytics and the way that they're able to run the numbers, what you said pretty much holds true, because in terms of the in-game decisions and strategy, I mean, we don't even see a lot of, there used to be a lot more, stolen bases, hit and runs, and those kind of plays that managers would call, but we don't even see any of that anymore. And when you make a move like a pinch hitter or something, it's a pretty obvious call, they're bringing in the lefty, so I'm going to take out my lefty batter who cannot hit lefties and put in the righty guy who matches lefties. It's all pretty simple. And I think they also say that the roster, the lineup order is not as important, over 162 games. It's more just about making sure the right 9 guys are in there.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the other thing, I think, to be that leader of men, I mean, in an overly simplified way to state the manager's job, I think it's basically to manage the clubhouse and manage the bullpen. And you've got to kind of just keep those arms fresh, and because you obviously can't go to the same guy every night. The managers, I know we criticize the managers for making, why'd you bring in this guy or why'd you bring in that guy? But they have more knowledge of who's down there, who's ready to go, who's, who's hanging a certain day, who needs a couple more days of rest, who's ready to go. So they kind of have more knowledge than the fans and the media have. So, but they've kind of got to do that. And then, like you said, they've got to be that leader of men. They've got to lead the clubhouse, and they got to get those, 25, 26, 28, however big the roster is these days. They've got to keep all those guys, and they're all competitive guys who want to win. They've got to keep them kind of all on the same page. And I think, that's the most difficult part of their job. It's we're oversimplifying it just by saying leader of men or managing the clubhouse, but I think that's essentially what they've got to do. And so it's nice that kind of Ned Yost kind of showed that and demonstrated what kind of had to be done. And he was there for a while, and he left on his own terms, which is rare to see with coaches.
He really, I think, earned that just by the way he handled the team and the media and everything from 2014, 2015. And he really just kind of, it seemed like a weight was lifted off of his shoulders once the team won that World Series in 2015, and he didn't need to care so much. And he actually became quite entertaining in the pregame and postgame interviews, where he would answer some sarcastic or answer questions sarcastically and talk about some of his other interests too. Like he went on a rant about, not a rant, but a whole thing about like one of the satellite or lander things that was happening, I think on Mars or something, when he was the manager, and just talking about how cool that all was. And it was nice to see his personality kind of come out too.
Yeah, so that's some of the, the ownership, the GMs and the managers. And then in just a moment, we'll look at some of the players from the past quarter century. Jeremy, now let's look at the roster for the Royals that I've assembled for the past quarter century. And just a quick reminder to all the listeners about how the roster is assembled. Going back 25 years, and this was done prior to the 2020 season. So the time frame was 1995 to 2019. You pick one player per year. You cannot repeat players, and you must form a coherent roster. It's a fun little experiment, putting the puzzle together. And if you're so inclined to do so, to make one of your own, there's a link on the website, boxseatbanner.com, to download a template off of Google Spreadsheets, and you can make your own rosters. So now let's get into this Royals roster. Starting at the catcher position, I've got Salvador Perez from 2013. He was worth 4.2 wins. He was an all-star and a Gold Glover back there. Providing great defense behind the plate. Offensively, he was a little above average. Not a lot of pop, 13 bombs, but he did hit 292. So you're getting great defense and a decent stick back there. At first base, Mike Sweeney, worth 5 wins, 24 bombs there, and he hit 340 for the Royals. He was an all-star in 2002. At second base, got the switch hitter Jose Offerman from 98. He was worth almost 5.5 wins, led the league with 13 triples, also added 28 doubles, 7 home runs, and he swiped 45 bags, hit 315, got on base at a 403 clip. So with that speed and getting on base at a good clip, that's valuable. At third base, got the lefty Mark Tejan, from 06, worth 3.7 wins, hit 18 bombs, 21 doubles, hit 290 for the Royals. And finishing up the infield, I've got Jay Bell from 97, worth 5.4 wins, solid there with the glove, as he's worth 2.1 defensively, 21 home runs, triple slash of 291, 368, 461. So, I mean, Jay Bell, not a huge name, but a lot of value there offensively from the shortstop position, as well as providing great defense. So, Jeremy, what are your thoughts on these guys? Any fond memories of them playing for the Royals?
Oh gosh, so many memories here. Salvador Perez has obviously been the heart of the Royals for since he came up, basically. Mike Sweeney was the heart of the Royals when he used to play. And it just it's so not disappointing, but it makes me sad when I remember just how good he was. That 340 batting average, that's insane.
Yeah.
And then the back injuries came and he just wasn't ever the same after that.
Hmm.
Mark Teahan was always one of my favorite players. um I don't know why. I just really loved him. And that 2006 season that you've got here was the year. Oh, he's good. He's finally figured it out, and he's gonna be great. And then he was not. Oh gosh, he tried so hard though. Um, and then Jay Bell. I actually never watched Jay Bell play. That was the year before I became a Royals fan, was '97. But I played this old baseball video game back then called Hardball 5, and he was on the Royals roster for that. And he was really good in that game. And I fell in love with Jay Bell, and I was super excited to watch him next year. And it's like, oh, he was only with the Royals for the 1 year. So much for that.
Then as we get into the outfield, in left, I've got Alex Gordon from 2011, Gold Glover. He was worth 7.3 wins. He hit 23 bombs, 45 doubles, hit 303, 376, 502, OPS plus of 140. So great production there to go along with his great defense in left. And continuing with great defense in center field, I've got Lorenzo Cain from 2015, worth 7 wins. He was an all-star. He was great defensively. He finally just recently won his first Gold Glove, but it seems like he had been deserving of a Gold Glove for several years. Hit 16 home runs, stole 28 bags, hit 307, 361, 477. And then in right, I've got Jermaine Dye from 99, worth 4.7 wins. He hit 27 bombs, drove in 119. And at DH, I've got Johnny Damon in 2000, the lefty. He was worth 6.2 wins, led the league with 136 runs, and led the league with 46 stolen bases, hit 327, 382, 495. Not the strongest arm, but he did play. He can get to some balls out there. He played center and left and also DH'd for the Royals that year in 2000. So what do you got on these guys? Gordon and Cain were there on the championship team. And Alex Gordon, he was always like a top prospect as like a third baseman, right?
Yep.
And then once they finally moved him to left, he really blossomed as a player.
Yeah. It's the thing that stands out to me here is that line that you're talking about, that batting average of 303, and the slugging of 502. He just retired after last season.
Mm-hmm.
And even then he was known for his ability still to take walks, but his batting average has really suffered in the past few years. And just being reminded that, yeah, he hit over 300 a couple times back in the day. He used to be a real offensive force as well as a defensive force out there. And then seeing Lorenzo Cain being the starter is kind of amazing to me, because I know some of the other center fielders the Royals have had. So seeing Lorenzo Cain out there is just like, man, the Royals have just been really lucky with center fielders over the franchise history and even in recent history. And Lorenzo Cain is still the best out of all of them. And he was so underrated. And like you said, he deserved Gold Gloves for years before he ended up getting them. And part of that was because in 2014 and 2015, he kept being shifted to right field late in games, not because he couldn't play center field, but because he could play right field better than the defensive. They were bringing a defensive replacement in for the right fielder, and they would bring in Gerard Dyson, and Dyson could play center almost as well as Cain, but Cain could play right field a lot better than Dyson could. So that was why they kind of did that defensive change up. And so he wasn't getting enough innings in center field, so he didn't get voted for Gold Glove. And Jermaine Dye was an amazing force of nature. It took him, it seemed like forever to get things figured out as a hitter, but once he did, he just kept hitting home runs. I'll never forget, there was a game the Royals were playing against Tampa Bay, and I was watching that game on TV, and he came up with the bases loaded, and I yelled at my dad to come downstairs and come watch this game because Jermaine Dye was up with the bases loaded, and as soon as my dad got there, he immediately hit a grand slam. And my dad was like, "Oh, is that the replay? Did you call me down to watch the replay?" I'm like, "No, I just had this feeling." And Johnny Damon has a special place in my heart because the first Royals game I ever attended in person, he hit a leadoff home run. And my sister and my dad were not sitting in our seats. They were back in the concourse. Can't remember why. Maybe she had to go to the bathroom or something. But they started setting off the fireworks for the home run, and she thought cars were exploding in the parking lot. And I think 2000 was the year that Johnny Damon just suddenly got really hot and started stealing all those bases and scoring all those runs when he had to play center field while Carlos Beltran was injured. And Carlos Beltran was a much better center fielder than Johnny Damon was.
Yeah.
But it was decided that Johnny Damon had gotten hot because he was in center field. So they forced Carlos Beltran to go play left field just so Johnny Damon could keep being hot.
Yeah, those those superstitions with the baseball players, you don't mess with a streak.
Yeah.
So yeah, now we'll get into this bench. We've got Whit Merrifield from 2018. He was worth 5.2 wins. He stole 45 bags, 12 homers, 43 doubles, hit over 300, and he's versatile. He plays second base, but you can also put him in center. You can put him in any outfield spot. I've got Jorge Soler from 2019. Solar Power led the league with 48 home runs. It did come out of price since he also led the league with 178 strikeouts. But when he connects, it goes a long ways. And my other outfielder, the guy you just mentioned, switch hitter, Carlos Beltran, I've got him in 01. He hit 24 bombs, stole 31 bags, hit over 300. And provided great defense there in center. And then the backup catcher, John Buck from 07. It was, I was struggling to find a backup catcher, but he did hit 18 home runs. So he does have that going for him, which is nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, so a lot of power there with Soler. And with Carlos Beltran, Johnny Damon, Jermaine Dye, it's kind of tough to, Lorenzo Cain, with Cain, Damon, and Beltran, it's tough to kind of all fit them in the lineup at once, but they are all on the roster. But yeah, so any other thoughts on these guys, Merrifield, Soler, Beltran, Buck?
Let's see. So Whit Merrifield is kind of actually a controversial player, in that he was clearly the best player on the team in 2018 and even 2019. But he's also up over 30 now, and a lot of people think that a lot of the more casual fans, I guess, maybe that's a bad assumption, but that's the kind of assumption I make, is that the more casual fans think he's going to keep being good for a long time, and a lot of other people think he's a middle infielder. He can play in the outfield, but he's kind of a mediocre outfielder. He's not really great at it. And he's getting into his 30s. It's kind of questionable, like how much longer is he going to be good? So he's kind of a controversial figure. Jorge Soler, I will never forgive him because Mike Moustakas, who did not make this list somehow, he was my favorite player for the longest time, still one of my favorite players, even though he's not a Royal anymore, had set the Royals record in home runs and hit 38 just a couple of years prior. And then Jorge Soler shows up and he just hits 48 and makes it look easy. So I'll never be able to forgive him for that. No, he's a lot of fun to watch when he's healthy and when he's hitting the ball. When he's not healthy or when he's not hitting the ball, it's a little frustrating, as you alluded to with those strikeouts. Carlos Beltran was part of the best outfield in baseball back in the early 2000s with Jermaine Dye and Johnny Damon. There just was not a better outfield in baseball. And then all three of those guys left. The big thing, Carlos Beltran was a really interesting one. it reminds me of actually a story about Johnny Damon, where the team bought Johnny Damon a house in Kansas City as an attempt to try and to convince him to take less money to stay in Kansas City. Like, you have a house now, isn't that great? You don't need a couple million more dollars to play for some other team. And Carlos Beltran, I remember they had a deal done with Carlos Beltran. They were going to extend him for 3 more years, his last season with them, and he asked for $1 million more, which is a lot to you and me, but to a baseball team is nothing. It's just $1 million more. He's the best center fielder maybe in the sport. He's certainly the best center fielder you've had in a while. Give him the $1 million, keep the guy. And they wouldn't do it. Or no, they had the deal done. Sorry, I got that backwards. They had the deal done, and then the owner said, get him to sign it for $1 million less. And that was when David Glass was really cheap. Sorry for the confusion there, but yeah. So, and then he ended up obviously getting traded, actually for John Buck and Mark Tien, were 2 of the guys that came back in that deal. So, there was a lot of hope. The Royals felt they needed a catcher and they needed a third baseman, and obviously neither of those guys really worked out for the Royals, unfortunately.
Do Royals fans have meetings with Marlins fans on Thursday nights to discuss, to sympathize with each other about having the best outfield in baseball at one point and to have them all go on elsewhere?
There's been talks. We haven't quite scheduled it yet, but we're looking into it. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Sounds like the support group could be there. It is disappointing to see these, great players come up and unable to hold them onto them. But yeah, you kind of forget that they had, these guys, especially Damon and Beltran, who came up with the Royals and were great for them, and then went on, and we kind of remember them. I think the casual baseball fan remembers them more, on other teams.
Absolutely.
But yeah, we kind of forget how great they were for the Royals.
Both made their stamps in different playoffs for different teams. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now we'll get into the pitching staff here. We'll start with Kevin Appier from 96. He went 14-11 with 3.62 ERA. And I know, sometimes when you look at ERAs, some of these ERAs of the starters are kind of looking a little high when you thinking about them on a quarter century team like this, but he was well above average. His ERA plus was 137. He struck out just about a batter an inning, 207 strikeouts. And then we've got, I'll skip this one and go to Mark Gubiza from 95. He was worth about 4.5 wins, led the league with 33 games started. He was a workhorse with over 200 innings. He did not strike out a lot of batters, but he was above average. ERA plus of 127. His ERA was 3.75. The lefty Darryl May from 03, he went 10-8 with a 3.77 ERA, 130 ERA plus. He was worth 5.9 wins. Gil Mesh from 08, he was worth just a shade under 5 wins. He went 14-11, 34 starts, which led the league. His ERA a hair under 4. And then the ace of the staff, Zach Greinke from 09, when he was a Cy Young Award winner and All-Star. He only went 16-8. He led the league in ERA at 2.16. In ERA plus at 2.05, which means he was like 105% better than league average. Led the league in FIP at 233, in WHIP at 1.07, and he kept the ball in the yard, led the league in home runs per 9. He struck out over a batter an inning, 242 strikeouts, and he was just incredible to watch that year. I mean, he's been incredible for a long time, but that year he was just unreal. So yeah, what are your thoughts on this rotation, on these guys here?
Let's see. So Kevin Appier is not a name a lot of people seem to really spend much time thinking about, but he's actually the career WAR leader with the Royals. No other starting pitcher has ever accrued as much WAR as Kevin Appier with the team. He was just so good for so long, and he never did win a Cy Young award. He came really close one year. I can't remember which year it was, but he ended up losing to a White Sox pitcher who got more wins, because pitcher wins were just so important.
Yep.
Mark Gubicza was kind of the last of the good starting pitchers. The Royals used to have just boatloads of starting pitchers back in the 70s and 80s. It seemed like they always had 2 or 3 or even 4 or 5 really good starting pitchers. And that kind of went away in the 90s, and Gubicza was kind of just the last leftover from that time. Daryl May, I barely remember him. I remember really like him. I remember him being kind of an underdog pitcher in that he wasn't striking guys out, and it was like, will he succeed? Will he not succeed? And he would go on stretches where he would be okay, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I just want to root for this guy because he barely belongs in a major league rotation, and I want him to be good. I want him to succeed. And then Gil Mesh was, for the longest time, the Royals' biggest free agent signing. He got 5 years, $55 million. And that season, I can't remember if that was the first season or maybe the second season after the Royals signed him. And it was just like, oh, they paid a lot of money for a starting pitcher, and he was good. Now, one starting pitcher wasn't enough to make the team contend, but it was interesting to see the team suddenly spend a lot of money on a guy and actually see him be pretty good. And of course, Zach Greinke, saving him for last, just like you did. He was something else. Royals fans knew he was going to be special before he ever made it to the big leagues. And then, 2009 was kind of his coming out party to the rest of the world. And that was actually, it was a big deal that he won the Cy Young Award that year because, as you mentioned, he only won 16 games because
Yeah.
the rest of the team was terrible. The bullpen was terrible. The lineup was terrible. It was just bad. And Zach Greinke and his 2.16 ERA could only make up for so much bad. So he didn't win 20 games. It was like, will he get the Cy Young Award? Because he's so much better than everybody else right now. As you're talking about, like, he's more than twice as good as the average pitcher in the American League or in baseball right now. And he kind of deserves the Cy Young Award, but he didn't win 20 games. Don't you kind of got to win 20 games to win the Cy Young Award? And then eventually, of course, he did win the Cy Young Award, and pitcher wins have been on the down slope ever since. And I say good riddance.
Yeah. And I mean, Greinke, listed the categories he led the league in. He also had 6 complete games and 3 shutouts.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, surprisingly did not lead the league. Those would lead the league by far in 2019. But yeah, just he was incredible to watch. And you talked about how, Moustakas is one of your favorite players, even though he's not on the Royals anymore. Greinke, I mean, I'm a Dodger fan, so I loved watching Greinke with the Dodgers. But even before he came to the Dodgers and after he's left the Dodgers, I've always loved rooting for Greinke. I think he's my favorite player on a team that's not my favorite team right now. And then we'll get into the bullpen in a kind of swingman role. I've got the lefty Danny Duffy. He made 26 starts, but he also came out of the bullpen, I think 16 times that year for the Royals. He was worth about 4 wins. He went 12-3, ERA of about 3.5. And so, yeah, he'd give you innings whenever you need him. He had almost 180 innings that year, pitching out of the pen and starting. I've got Joakim Soria from 2010, dominant year out of the pen for him. He was worth 3.7 wins. He went 1-2 with a 1.78 ERA, 43 saves that year, and he struck out a little over a batter an inning, 71 Ks in 65 2/3 innings. Wade Davis in 2014, one of the relievers that formed that 3-headed monster out of the pen for the Royals when they were dominant there in 2014 and 15. He went 9-2 9 wins out of the pen is, I mean, he's getting a lot of decisions there. I imagine they're playing a lot of tight games, and
Yep.
he's throwing shutdown innings, and they're getting a run for him. An ERA of 1 in 72 innings. He struck out 109 guys, good for 13.6 Ks per 9. I've got Mike Minor, the lefty from 2017. He went 6-6, ERA of about 2.5. He struck out about 10 batters per 9. Another lefty, Andrew Cisco from 05, worth 2.3 wins, ERA about 3.11. He struck out just about a batter in innings, 76 Ks and 75 and a third innings. And Kelvin Herrera from 2012, another one of those dominant relievers, ERA of 2.35. He had 84 and a third innings, struck out 8.2 per 9. And finishing it up, we've got another lefty, Jaime Cerda from 04. The loogie, he went 45 and 2/3 innings in 53 games. So bring him in to get those lefties out, get a ground ball, I'm assuming, because he didn't strike out a ton. But yeah, those are the relievers. I mean, Wade Davis really stands out here,
Oh, yeah.
I think, the most. But yeah, what do you got on these relievers?
The first thing that I notice when I look at this list of relievers is the guy who's missing is Greg Holland, who was the closer in those years that Kelvin Herrera and Wade Davis were there and dominating. And that was one of the things when I was looking at this roster. I was like, surely there's got to be room for Greg Holland on here somewhere, and there just isn't, because as good as he was, when he was good, Wade Davis was better. And then he got hurt in 2015 and left the team for a while. So he's a big name, stands tall in Kansas City lore, but Wade Davis kind of overshadows him. And you talked about that 9-2 record Wade Davis had in 2014, and a lot of that was because Greg Holland was the closer. So in a close tie game, you bring in Wade Davis, and he'll shut the door on you and see if the Royals can't scrape together one more run.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why he was coming up with those wins, was because he wasn't the closer, but he could pitch as well as the closer.
Yeah.
Danny Duffy's 2016 stands out to me, because he started that year in the bullpen and he pitched really well, and then he got moved into the rotation kind of out of necessity. The Royals at that point weren't sure he was going to be a starter anymore, I don't think, but they really wanted him to be, and then they kind of put him back in the rotation, and he just kept pitching as well as he had in the bullpen, and he ended up earning a contract extension by pitching so well in 2016. And then you got Joakim Soria, was the Royals closer for a few years when the team was bad, but boy, if they had a lead in the 9th inning, he was gonna save it for you. Until he got hurt, had that Tommy John surgery, and then left the team. And a lot of people were like, oh no, the Royals should have traded him before he got hurt. And it was just one of those things that was a little disappointing. Mike Minor was really good in 2017. The interesting thing to me about Mike Minor is that the Royals were convinced he was only going to be a reliever anymore, and they kind of let him be a fireman reliever, let him pitch a couple of innings in the middle of the game, didn't force him to be the closer. But at the same time, it was like, oh, well, he's just a reliever now. And then he comes back and he starts for Texas for the next few years and was really good there. And now he's back with the Royals again for 2021. So we'll see if he's going to be a starter or a reliever now. But that was interesting. And then Andy Cisco and Jaime Cerda, those guys, they sure did pitch for the Royals at one point.
Yeah. So yeah, this is the roster that I've assembled. And then, coming right up, we'll talk about the guys who missed the cut. Jeremy, every week I talk about the difficulties in putting these rosters together. It's really a puzzle that you're assembling. And unfortunately, you just don't have room for all the guys you want to get on the roster. I know listeners, they may be listening and be like, oh, how could you miss this guy? How could you miss that guy? And so, now is the time when we talk about those misses. So I'll throw it to you first. Who are some guys who, deserve mention, or who you may be surprised were not on this roster?
Um, Gosh, there are some big names that didn't make this roster.
Yeah, I mean,
Like
you
I
already
mentioned,
you just mentioned Greg Holland,
Greg Holland was missing, and Mike Moustakis didn't make it.
right? Right.
Another one that doesn't necessarily surprise me, but I think would surprise a lot of Royals fans didn't make it, is Eric Hosmer
Mm-hmm.
isn't on
Mm-hmm.
here. He's just never, it looks like you were kind of trying to focus on high WAR guys, and he's never been a high WAR guy. He had one good year basically.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I've been pretty frustrated with him his entire career for all the ground balls he hits.
Right.
So I know I'm kind of in the minority in that opinion, but there it is. I kind of thought David DeJesus might find his way on here. He was a left fielder, center fielder for the Royals when they were really bad. He was the only bright spot for a while. Seems like there should be a couple other relievers on here that didn't quite make it, but I'm drawing some blanks on some names. It's kind of surprising that James Shields didn't have a
Mm-hmm.
shot to be on here.
Mm-hmm.
Irvin Santana was only here for 1 year, but he was really good for that 1 year, which was 2013. So yeah, he got beat out by Salvador Perez. So that you got to have Salvador Perez's best year on here when you're looking at Royals catchers from the last 30 years. There's just not enough of those. Like you said, with John Buck was the best you could do, right? And I loved John Buck, but he wasn't that great.
Yeah, it was it's a fun little experiment, like you said, and when they were good, obviously 2014, 2015, their best years. You want to take so many guys from those years, but they overlap with each other, and it's you got to make choices on who to pick. Yeah, Hosmer is a guy that had a lot of years that would overlap with some of these other guys on here, and Moustakas is the same. I think Alcides Escobar was a guy who, again, I don't think he would necessarily be, deserving to be here over Jay Bell, but he's a guy, shortstop on those pennant winning teams. So a guy that I kind of associate with the Royals and doing well. So, and then the other name I wanted to mention, well, a couple. One was Chili Davis, just because, Chili Davis, that's a great name. And back in 97, hit 30 bombs. So wanted to throw that out there, give him some recognition. And then the last guy I wanted to mention, a guy who, tragically left us far too soon, was Giordano Ventura, who died in that tragic car crash in one of the off seasons, right? I think it was home country.
Yeah, it was in his home country, and I want to say it was before the 2016 season, 2017 season.
Yeah, that sounds right. And
when the Royals still thought they were going to be good, yeah.
Yeah, and he had all the makings of an ace. I know that, in those, he didn't have like a tremendous full season yet, but he had the makings of that, and he had some great starts in the postseason, if I remember correctly. And
yeah,
I remember one of the times he got hit by a comebacker or something, right? And then he threw a couple warm-up pitches, and like the warm-up pitches were like such an easy, like 98 or something like that. And obviously for his family, it's a tragic loss, and also the baseball world. We lost a great young player, but who we don't get to watch enjoy the game of baseball. And it's tough for the teammates and for the Royals to go on. You're thinking you're building around this player, and tragedy strikes. So it's disappointing on a number of fronts, but that was another name I wanted to mention who could have been on this roster, and unfortunately was not.
It was also, there was the kind of the coincidence. In 2014, you were talking about the good playoff starts. He had that Game 6 of the World Series start against the Giants that he dedicated to his friend Oscar Taveras, who had died in a car crash. And he pitched, I think it was 7 shutout innings against the Giants in that one, and then just a couple of years later, gone from the same cause.
Yeah. So it's unfortunate. And I know it's a part of life, but when it happens, something like that, it really rocks the baseball world, and it rocked the Royals. So again, just another name that I wanted to mention there, and memorialize him in some way. But those are the guys who Ventura, along with the names that we mentioned previously, Hosmer, Moustakas, Shields, Holland, some guys who did not make the cut. It's tough. So if listeners, if you have any other comments on guys who you thought should have been on the roster, go ahead, let me know, let me hear it, let me know who I screwed up with by putting on the roster or leaving off the roster. Again, it's a fun experiment, and if you guys want to make your own roster, then go ahead and visit the website boxseatbanner.com, download that spreadsheet on Google Sheets, and make your own, whether it's for the Royals or anybody else. And if you do make one, I would love to see those, and submit those to me. So it's a fun project. I know, Jeremy, you mentioned that you looked at mine and there weren't really too many changes you would have made to mine.
Yeah, I was really trying to find a place to put Moustakas or Holland, and I just couldn't justify removing the guys you had where I would put them for all the, like you're saying, it's building that puzzle.
Yeah.
For all the waterfall of changes that would also have to occur, it just didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, so it's fun.
The one thing I want to say about this, though, is that anybody who wants to build this roster like this is going to have a lot more fun with starting pitchers, I think, in 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, and that's another point. I do it for the past quarter century, and obviously in a few years we'll have a different past 25 years to look at. Or you could really pick any 25-year stretch, for any organization that you wanted to do, which that's another thing in itself. Like what's the best 25-year stretch that any organization can use for one of these rosters? It's a fun little thought exercise. But yeah, those are the tough decisions that we had to make. And yeah, I recommend putting one together yourself, listeners, if you feel inclined. Jeremy, every week we open it up for Q&A on social media. So again, make sure to follow on Twitter and Instagram to get your questions in. This week, our first question comes from Twitter at Royal Rupert. He asks, who from the non-roster invitees do you see making the team, and which player will make the biggest contribution in 2021? Thanks. So Jeremy, what do you think? Who are you up to date on the NRIs?
Yeah, I was looking at those earlier this morning just to make sure that I had a little bit of knowledge to share with this question. So looking at the non-roster invitees, I see 2 guys whose names stand out to me as guys who could easily make the opening day roster. Hanser Alberto, the infielder who is with the Royals, with the Orioles. Royals, it sounds the same in my brain. He kind of stands out to me as a little bit older, kind of hot, the ceiling version of current second baseman Nicky Lopez. So you can go with Nicky Lopez, who's a little bit younger and hasn't reached that yet, or you can go with Hanser Alberto, who's like, I think they have him on a deal where if he gets to the big leagues, he can get up to $2 million in incentives, so he's not expensive. And he's kind of the ceiling of like a high contact, very low strikeout, very low walks guy, that we were kind of hoping Nicky Lopez would turn out to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one I see on here that I think could easily make the opening day roster, maybe not easily, but has a real shot at it if he has a decent spring, is Wade Davis.
Mm-hmm.
is back on a minor league deal. And obviously Royals fans remember him very fondly, and he's not as good as he was back in 2014, probably anymore, but he might still have a little something left in the tank, and I think the Royals will give him every opportunity to make the big league roster on opening day. As far as who among these guys could make the biggest impact, if we're just talking about 2021, then we're probably looking at these young starting pitchers, Asa Lacy, Jackson Kowar, uh, Austin Cox, a handful of others, Jonathan Bolin, these guys from the last few college pitching drafts that the Royals have had, that haven't made the big leagues yet. I don't know that they'll make the opening day roster, but it seems like you would expect them to have a good chance to make the big league roster at some point this year. And they all have a ton of talent, and they've been very good in the minor leagues. So could very easily have a huge impact on the Royals this year. And if you're looking for the long term, then of course Bobby Witt Jr. is getting his getting to be in camp this year. I don't expect him to be on the big league roster in 2021, but maybe he can shove his way on late in the year, and then next year is when I really expect him to actually start competing to really be on the roster full time.
Okay. Our next question comes from. We'll go with Matt Hutchison's question next. So first of all, he was bringing up Kansas City barbecue. I mean, where does Kansas City barbecue rank among the barbecues?
See, this is where I kind of diverge from the rest of the world in that I think there are basically two kinds of barbecue. There's Kansas City barbecue, and there's Texas barbecue, but let's be honest, it's Kansas City barbecue. It just thinks it's different. And then there's Carolina barbecue, and you think you're something different over there in Tennessee, but you're not. And so basically, to my way of thinking, you have Kansas City barbecue, which is tomato-based barbecue sauces, and you got Carolina barbecue, which is vinegar-based barbecue sauces. And I love them both equally. I don't really want to say that one of them is better than the other because it's like comparing apples and oranges to me. You're talking about such different flavors when you're talking about those barbecues, and nobody else really even exists as far as I'm concerned. So I might be the only person who grew up in Kansas City who doesn't just automatically say Kansas City barbecue is the best. What are you even talking about?
Now, obviously, when the Kansas City barbecue is when it's fresh, it's unbelievable. But Matt's question now, he gets a little more specific. He says, what's more enjoyable, Kansas City Royals baseball in August, September, or week-old Kansas City barbecue heated up in a microwave?
Ooh, that's hard. Because heating up that barbecue in the microwave, that's not the way you want to do that.
It's not doing it any justice.
No, if you're going to reheat it, first of all, try it cold. Like you got some brisket or you got something like that, put it on a sandwich. Like don't bother reheating it. But if you're going to reheat it, put it in the toaster oven, okay?
Absolutely.
Or in the oven.
Yeah.
Don't put it in the microwave. And I'm going to say the barbecue is still the better experience just because it was better to begin with. And that August, September Royals baseball is really rough when you're not talking 2014, 2015, 2016. So, I'm going to go with the barbecue. At least that experience is over more quickly.
The question is how are you having barbecue left over for a week? I mean, I'm eating that the first day or two, and
absolutely
there's nothing left that long. And now we had a lot of questions coming in. We mentioned George Brett earlier, and I think his most famous incident was on the field with the pine tar incident. But there's a maybe lesser known incident. But we had a few comments coming in on this. I'll take Chris Kirk's. Can you name the meal and the casino which George Brett ate at that had his dinner for his infamous incident?
I know the casino was the Bellagio. I don't know what he had to eat.
Yeah, and listeners, if you're unaware of the incident, maybe you can Google that. I think there's a YouTube clip of him explaining it. Right, he's
He
mic'd up
loves
at
to tell
spring
that
training.
story.
Yeah,
There's probably more than one.
yeah, and he loves telling it probably more than he should love telling it.
He loves
So
it. Let's say he loves telling it more than I love hearing it. How about that?
So that's yeah, it's a fun one. I don't know if that's the proudest moment for El Segundo by having their most famous son um, have that incident, but yeah, we'll leave it at that for right now. And we'll end here. I've got a question for you. We talked about Greinke earlier. We talked about his on the field performance. But I mean, Greinke is a character, and there's so many great Greinke stories. So I want to ask you, what's your favorite Greinke story? You know, if you can't narrow it down to one, you can share a couple if you would like. But what do you got? Favorite Greinke story?
Yeah, I've got two just off the top of my head that are absolutely 100% classic Greinke. So he came up with this left-handed pitcher named Jeremy Offelt,
I
who
think I know
was
this
one of my
story.
favorites because we share that first name. And Offelt just dominated in spring training, so I had high hopes for him. That he didn't ever quite reach in Kansas City. He did really well for the Giants, unfortunately beating us in the 2014 World Series. But he pitched for the Royals for a while at the same time as Greinke. And there's this story that goes, there's one game where he threw a pitch and it just got absolutely hammered for a home run. And he went into the dugout and he was just furious. He's like, it wasn't even that bad of a pitch. And Greinke's like, no, it was right down the middle. And like Offelt just keeps ranting and Greinke keeps going, no, you threw it right down the middle. Like, that was a terrible pitch. Here, let me go get the film for you. It was bad. And then I think other people outside Kansas City know this. You probably know this being a Dodgers fan. But Zach Greinke actually considers himself a very good hitter,
Right.
As well as being a very good pitcher. So he would actually give hitting advice to some of the players sometimes. And there was a period where Alex Gordon was kind of in a slump. And Zach Greinke said, "Hey, Alex, come here. I want to show you something on video that I got for you." And Alex goes over there. He's all excited because he thinks he's about to get some great hitting advice from Zach Greinke, who actually apparently gave pretty good hitting advice to some Royals hitters at various times. But Greinke calls him over, and then he shows him a replay of Greinke hitting a home run when he was pitching for the Royals, and he says, "You should do that. Just hit home runs." So that was Greinke's he's an interesting character, and I'm glad we have his kind of quirkiness in baseball to give us some entertainment. But those are the two stories that always stand out at the top of my mind whenever anyone says he's a quirky guy.
Those are two of the ones that kind of I had tabbed that I had in the back of my mind. There was one other one. I think my overall favorite though is he was making, I'm not sure the circumstances, but he was making a minor league start. I'm not sure if it was like an injury rehab start or, like I said, I'm unaware of the circumstances behind it, but he was making a start in the minors. And as is often the case, they kind of give him some like parameters, like, he's on this pitch count and whatever. And so I'm not sure what the pitch count was, but let's say it was an 80 pitches. They want him to go about 80 pitches, about 6 innings. And we want him to throw about 75% fastballs. Again, I'm not sure what those exact numbers were, but those were, the kind of parameters. And he was pitching well all night. And Greinke had, he's always been a pretty good, control pitcher. He's been able to dot up his pitches. And this night, he was in complete control, and he was in what was going to be his last inning of work. And it was that, 6th inning when they told him, about 6 innings, about 80 pitches. And he had 2 outs, and like the count, it was like an 0-2 count on the batter or something. And he throws I forget if he threw the curveball here or if he threw the fastball. I think he threw a fastball here, he threw a fastball like way high out of the zone. And like I said, he'd been dotting up everything all night. And this one is like not even close. Then he comes with the deuce and he strikes the guy out. And it was odd because that pitch that he missed was way out of character for everything he'd been doing that night. And then they looked at the numbers after the outing. And again, they said, oh, we want you to throw about 80 pitches, about 6 innings and 75% fastballs. And he threw exactly 80 pitches in exactly 6 innings and exactly 75% fastball. So he knew, he's like, I got this guy 0-2. I have to throw 2 more pitches and one of them has to be a fastball. So I'm going to waste my fastball and then strike him out. And it's just like, such a pitching savant, and to be uber aware of everything like that.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that story, but I 100% believe that. That sounds exactly like Zack Greinke to me.
Yeah, it's, Greinke, you look around some of the great characters in the game. He's one of them, like Ricky Henderson. There's so many great stories floating about Ricky. I feel like Greinke's a similar way. There's just so many great stories out there about him. And yeah, if you take your time, if you get some free time there, go ahead and just Google Zack Greinke stories and you'll see some of the ones that we mentioned, and there's several others as well.
Yep.
So yeah, those are the questions this week. Again, follow on social media and submit any questions you have on future shows. Jeremy, as we get close to finishing here, we've talked about the roster in depth. So now let's grade the roster. What do you think the strengths and weaknesses of this roster are, and what letter grade would you assign it?
So I was just looking at this, and there are some names on here that I wouldn't really want to see if I was looking for like the best Royals of all time, right? So I don't want John Buck on here. I don't want Jaime Cerda on here. I don't want Andy Cisco on here. But they actually had, Andy Cisco anyway, and Daryl May's another one. They actually had really good years, those 1 year. So it actually seems like a pretty tough roster to beat. At least if it was going up against a normal MLB team. I feel like it's gotta compare a little bit favorably to other. I don't think it's gonna get completely washed out by other teams from the last 25 years that are built the same way. Like, not completely stomped into the ground, but it's probably not one of the best ones either, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What? I mean, I know it's tough for you to give a letter grade without seeing all the other rosters, but what letter grade would you assign it?
Let's see, like a C+ or a B- maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
Like it's trying real hard and it's getting a little bit lucky. Like, where did Daryl May get 6 wins? I mean, good golly. But I think it gets a little lucky, so it gets a little bit higher grade than it might have otherwise.
Yeah, I think when I look at this and when I when I compare it to other rosters that I've made, I think that one of the strengths of this team is they've got good speed. They've got a lot of triples, they got a lot of stolen bases. But outside of that, offensively, their numbers are not great. The outfield is strong, defensively, and like as you mentioned, they have Beltran and Damon and Kane. So they've got and Jermaine Dye. So they've got some good players out there. The infield is a bit weaker, especially when you compare that to other teams. The starting pitchers as a whole, I think they're kind of average. They're carried by Greinke, who is one of the more dominant pitchers. Kind of even, he's in the conversation this season as one of the better pitching seasons in this whole project that I have. You may have some from like Randy Johnson or Greg Maddux or Roger Clemens. I mean, this Greinke season is right up there with those guys. He's a true ace, so that helps. But yeah, the other starters are they're decent, but yeah, it's not as deep a rotation as some other teams can roll out there. But that is compensated by a dominant pen. we don't have necessarily a lot of saves. Like Soria was like the only closer who was at least closing during the season. I got him, man. He had 43 saves. But a lot of dominant power arms there. I mean, Davis we touched on, and who just was unreal. So yeah, I think their pen is really good. It's tough to see how it would play out, because again, I mentioned that they're outside of Greinke, their other starters are lagging a little behind, but I'm not sure how much this pen could make up for that. But I'm going to give them a solid C overall. Yeah, like you mentioned, yeah, they wouldn't be, just running to the ground, but they're not one of the stronger teams. And I think it's pretty impressive to, in my mind, put together what I feel like is a C roster with a team that, has just like 2 playoff appearances. So credit to them. But yeah, that's what I think. So we're not too far off in our grades. And what'd you say, C plus, B minus? I give them a solid C. So yeah, that's what we got on grading this Royals roster. Jeremy, it is time to wrap up the podcast episode. It's been fun talking about the Royals with you, and I want to throw it to you first. What are your final thoughts that you want to share with us?
Well, before I say anything else, I just want to say thank you for having me. This has absolutely been a blast. And just it's been really fun to kind of look back at this history of the Royals, and kind of remember some of the good and some of a lot of the bad. But it also it reminds me that the future doesn't have to be as dark as the past has been. Just thinking about kind of all those young pitching prospects they've got that are just almost big league ready, and thinking, oh man, they're so close to being relevant again, maybe in a year or two, maybe even this year with all the free agent signings they've had. So I'm just I'm glad to just have had this time to think about where the Royals have been and where they're going, and just kind of playing with that roster puzzle with you was a lot of fun. So I'm just glad to have had this experience and looking forward to what comes next.
Yeah, when I look at the Royals, I mean, outside of the couple of years there, they were not necessarily a team that I paid a lot of attention to. They've not had a great quarter century, let's be honest, but they've made the most of their opportunities when they've gotten to the postseason. Like we mentioned, that 2014, that wild card game was unbelievable. And yeah, they went all the way to Game 7 of the World Series, and then they won the World Series the following year. So, I mean, two postseason appearances, two pennants. That's a pretty good success rate once they get into the postseason. Problem is just now they got to figure out how to get into the postseason more frequently. But yeah, you got to give them credit for that. In my opinion, they've got a GM with a great outlook on the game. He's trying to win. And, despite their struggles and some of the obstacles that they've got there, I feel like they're an easy team to root for. And I mean, I like their colors. It goes well with the Dodger blue that I'm used to rooting for. So, if I turn on an AL game, I might feel like I'm watching the Dodgers with those uniforms. But yeah, I feel like they're an easy team to root for. And like you mentioned, they've got some prospects coming up. And in that AL Central, I know the Twins and the White Sox are tough right now. But who knows what Cleveland's trying to do.
I'm not sure Cleveland knows what Cleveland's trying to do.
Yeah. So the opportunity is there. So yeah, you mentioned these prospects. So the future could be bright. We could see another window opening there for the Royals. So I wish the Royals the best going forward. And Jeremy, again, thank you for joining me here on the program today. I've enjoyed talking Royals baseball with you. So again, thank you for joining us here. And it is time to wrap up. So again, thanks for listening. Follow on social media, chime into the conversation. This is Billy Ballas of Box Seat Banter, signing off.